Well, first results are being projected in Canada, where a snap election is being held to determine who will become the country's next Prime Minister. As I mentioned, polls have closed in the Atlantic region. And like the UK, Canada has a first-past-the-post electoral system. This actually means that the candidate who gets the most votes in each electoral district or riding wins that seat and becomes an MP. The share of votes doesn't have to be a majority. It just has to be one more vote than the second-place candidate. So basically, under this system, a party can secure the most seats in the House of Commons without receiving the most votes across the whole country, which is exactly what happened in the last election. In fact, you must know that back in 2021, the Liberals finished as the largest party by winning 47% of seats ahead of the Conservatives on 35%. We are going to be tracking the latest updates for you at the moment. But first, the former Bank of England boss, Mark Carney, who became Canada's Prime Minister after he was sworn in last month, he's actually fighting to stay in the job after calling a snap general election, which will see Canadians pick their next leader and pick who is going to be fighting up against Donald Trump. Mark Carney was the first non-British person to take on the top banking role in the central bank's more than 300-year history. This is something we've highlighted earlier as well. And he had previously steered his home country through the 2008 financial crash as the governor of the Bank of Canada. But here's the key point that many find surprising. Unlike most Prime Minister hopefuls, Mark Carney has never held political office. Still, we are here today, and he handily won the Liberal Party contest to replace outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in early March. As we know, he is now touting his experience handling the global economic crisis, hoping Canadians will see him as the next leader most likely to stand up to the US president, who has launched a trade war on his northern neighbor. Just take a look at Mark Carney's career highlights.
Once better known in financial circles than political ones, Mark Carney is now at the centre of Canada's political future, leading the Liberal Party to become Canada's 25th Prime Minister. Carney took the baton from Justin Trudeau at a moment of political uncertainty and global tension. With President Trump's repeated threats related to trade and even annexation, Canada's defence, many now believe, could rest on Carney's shoulders. Born in the Northwest Territories, raised in Edmonton, he went on to become the governor of the Bank of Canada during the 2008 crisis. In 2013, he became the first non-Brit to head the Bank of England and later steering the UK through Brexit. But Carney wasn't always destined for politics. He aligned with the Liberal Party in 2021, just as Trudeau's popularity began to fall. When offered the finance minister post in 2023, he declined. This move triggered internal crisis, and within months, Trudeau stepped aside. Carney's campaign is focused on fixing the economy, shielding Canada from Trump's trade threats, and stabilizing a fractured political climate. When Trump hinted at annexing Canada, Carney's viral comeback, "We find you attractive, but we are not moving in with you," struck a chord. His international credentials give him credibility in navigating economic turbulence. But critics argue he spent more time leading foreign institutions than serving Canada. As Canada decides, whoever is the Prime Minister next will have to deal with the volatile US President, among other challenges. With Ridhima Kedia, NDTV World.
Well, in sharp contrast, Pierre, 45-year-old, is no newcomer to Canadian politics. He was first elected to Parliament at the age of 25. He has spent nearly 2 decades in Ottawa, earning a reputation as a combative debater and policy wonk. But his political career includes serving as Minister for Democratic Reform and Employment during the Stephen Harper government. And since becoming the Conservative Party leader back in 2022, Mr. Poilievre has actually reinvigorated the party's base with a message built around personal freedom, economic responsibility, and government accountability. In fact, his mantra of freedom over control has resonated with voters disillusioned by pandemic-era restrictions, inflation, and rising government intervention. But champion of economic reform, central to Poilievre's platform is his promise to make life affordable again for ordinary Canadians. Take a look.
A country in crisis, a generation locked out of home ownership, a cost of living that spiraled out of control, and one man who promised a reset.
We need a new conservative government for a change that will axe taxes, greenlight construction of homes, mines, pipelines, LNG plants, bring home our jobs so that we can reinforce our economic fortress against the Americans.
Pierre Poilievre, once the outsider, now at the heart of Canada's political reckoning. A populist firebrand who built his campaign on common sense and a sharp rejection of what he called Trudeau-era authoritarian socialism. Just a year before his election win, Poilievre was thrown out of Parliament for calling Justin Trudeau a wacko. He called it straight talk. Critics called it divisive, dangerous even. On the campaign trail, he relentlessly targeted the Liberals, blaming them for what he sees as a weakened economy.
Mr. Carney, you claim that you want our country to respond with strength, but after the last decade, half of which time you've been Justin Trudeau's economic advisor, our economy is weaker than ever before.
Labeled Trump-light by critics, Poilievre has drawn comparisons to the US president. Comparisons he firmly rejects. When Donald Trump suggested Canada becomes the 51st state and impose tariffs, Poilievre hit back.
The message to President Trump should be to knock it off. Now is not a time for weakness. Now is not a time to continue on with the failures that got us into this place of dependency. Now is the time to take back control and relaunch our economy so that we can confront the President's unjustified threats and tariffs in a position of strength.
From backing the Freedom Convoy to pledging the biggest crackdown on crime in Canadian history, Poilievre has promised sweeping reforms. His vow to scrap Canada's carbon pricing framework has alarmed climate advocates. His wife, Anaida, came to Canada as a child refugee. And while Poilievre speaks of integration over identity, his immigration policy is directly linked to housing supply and affordability. For his supporters, he is the antidote to liberal elitism. For his critics, a hardliner cloaked in pragmatism. As Canada decides, the world watches. With Ridhima Kedia, NDTV World.
And joining us with the latest updates from Ground Zero, we have with us live from Vancouver my colleague Maha Siddiqui, who's been giving us the lowdown on all that's crucial in Battleground Canada. Also joining us live at the moment, Vikram Chaudhary, live from Brampton, and Yash Chawla is live from Richmond Hill, Toronto with us. Maha, straight to you first from Vancouver. In Vancouver, where you've been reporting that affordability is the crisis, are voters willing to trust Mark Carney's economic expertise to fix the current cost of living crisis and housing? Or Pierre Poilievre is the man that is going to be trusted with this big task?
Well, let's just put it this way, that we will get to know in a few hours from now, Parmeshwar, where the voters have really placed their trust in. But British Columbia is an interesting case because the NDP that at the moment is looking in a very weak situation because the preliminary results are not showing them having opened their account at all right now. NDP does have a good base here in British Columbia. And it is believed that the NDP supporters who are this time looking at Liberals because of the kind of crisis that has emanated from the United States with regards to the trade war and the threat of annexation, it is leading the Liberals to become stronger over here. And Jagmeet Singh's own seat was apparently in peril because of this. So we'll get to know whether Jagmeet Singh himself has been able to retain his seat in a few hours from now. Voting continues in British Columbia, 7:30 p.m. in just about 20 minutes from now is when the polling will end finally in the West Coast, and then counting will start in the West Coast as well. In the East Coast, counting has already started, and that is why we are seeing the Liberals at the moment quite ahead in the counting, in the numbers, with 22 preliminary results in favor of the Liberals, with almost a 67% voter support there. The Conservatives are at 10 with 29% voter support, and Bloc Québécois is at 2 seats. These are only preliminary results, but if they are giving us a sense of the trend, then the Liberals clearly and Mark Carney, therefore, are clearly in pole position. And the East Coast is also certainly more important in terms of who wins this battle, because around 200 seats are between Quebec and Ontario, 122 seats from Ontario and 78 seats from Quebec. And therefore, these provinces certainly become more important than, say, a province like British Columbia. Certainly, it is the third largest number of seats from British Columbia for Parliament, around 38. However, whoever wins the East Coast, really the Atlantic side, is the one who is in a powerful position to be able to go first past the post. And that is really what parties are aiming at the moment. 172 is the halfway mark. And it appears, if we go by the opinion polls and the projections, and at the moment, the preliminary results, that the Liberals and Mark Carney are in a fairly good position at the moment.
Right, Mahab, in terms of the key issues, how much is immigration being discussed in Vancouver, especially the outer suburbs, where we're given to understand that many Indians have moved after being priced out?
That's right. In some of these suburbs that we're talking about over here, Surrey, which is a city that is about a 50-minute to 1-hour drive from Vancouver, is where a large number of people of Indian origin reside, and largely the Sikh community. A large number of students also come to British Columbia for their education, and this is the province that has the second largest number of international students, and the largest number of international students over the past couple of years have been coming from India. So you can imagine the number of people of Indian origin in this area. Clearly, the housing crisis has been one that has hit these people hard. We have seen even the Canadians being hit by the housing crisis themselves. And therefore, that was one of the big issues that was prevalent till about 4 months ago. The housing crisis as well as inflation. Vancouver is one of the few cities that is extremely expensive to live in for the prices of commodities as well as the housing rentals. And therefore, this was a major issue for the people over here. However, 20th January changed it all. And the entire campaign pivoted then over who will respond better to Donald Trump. And that became the top of the mind issue for people in British Columbia as well. If you talk to voters, they are more concerned right now about who would be the best person to be able to negotiate with Donald Trump. And therefore, in that context, the perception is that Mark Carney would be a better choice to be able to take on US President Donald Trump, with him being a former banker, an economist who has interestingly been the advisor to Justin Trudeau, who hasn't been very popular in the past. However, his campaign, Mark Carney's campaign, has been able to very cleverly de-link themselves from Justin Trudeau and be able to establish him as a credible person, a credible choice, despite him not being from a political background.
Right, Maha, do stay on with us as I get in a quick word from Ottawa at the moment. Joining us on the broadcast, Terry Milewski, who's the retired senior correspondent from CBC. Sir, as always, thank you so much for your time. What would you say is the single biggest issue driving voters to the polls across key battleground ridings today in Canada?
Well, that's easy. I think it's the trade war launched by President Trump. No other issue has matched this. And that, of course, is the issue which has turned this into such an astonishing contest, a situation where if you'd asked me a couple of months ago about the elections, I would have said, well, the election's over. The Liberals are toast. They're finished. There's no question about it. Then the whole thing flipped because of Trump's attack on Canada. And it was an attack on Canada, a threat to the existence of Canada and to its sovereignty, not just a severely damaging attack on Canada's economy in the tariffs on lumber and steel and potash and everything. So that one factor galvanized the campaign in this way. Firstly, it caught the Conservative leader, Mr. Poilievre, in a mistake. He had endorsed the wrong brand. He had endorsed the Trump brand, decrying bureaucrats and woke ideology.
Right.
And he used to, for years, he's been posing behind a podium and speaking behind a podium which says Canada first, a direct steal, a deliberate steal from Trump's America first. Then it turned out that he was the great enemy of Canada. Too late for Poilievre to switch. So that was what turned the whole thing around. That's the dominant issue of the campaign from start to finish.
Sir, would you argue that Mark Carney's technocratic appeal, meanwhile, has managed to actually cut through voter anger over affordability and housing?
Well, Mark Carney has been quite canny, in my view, by his sort of underwhelming style of campaigning. He's a bit professorial and a bit stiff on the stand, in contrast to Poilievre, who's quite fiery and is very good with slogans, axe the tax, this kind of thing. And Carney doesn't have that kind of flash. He doesn't have that kind of political experience. But it does seem quite clear from the polling that Canadian voters saw him and thought, there is one overriding issue. This is the guy we would rather send than Poilievre. We want to send Carney up to deal with Trump because he knows everyone. He knows the world economy. There isn't a finance minister on the planet that Mark Carney doesn't already know.
Right.
And we don't want to take a risk. We're not concerned even with secondary issues within Canada, the cost of living, groceries, gas, and so forth. I insisted that the principal issue was the one that turned those polling numbers around and wiped out at a stroke a 25-point lead for the Conservatives in a flash, in the space of less than a month. It was all gone, and now the Liberals are enjoying a very slim lead, and the results coming in early tonight suggest they're holding on to that lead, but we still have a way to go to see if they can not just win, but win a majority as well, which is what they're aiming for.
So would you then say that ultimately this election is about choosing a leader, or would you argue that it's about choosing Canada's survival strategy in an unpredictable world?
Well, in a way, it's a blend of the two, isn't it? They want somebody to lead that survival strategy, and they think they found him in Mark Carney. I mean, he's not completely unknown. I mean, and his role as an anti-politician or a non-politician has been, I think, a little bit exaggerated. Right. I mean, he was a senior economic advisor to Justin Trudeau, so it's not as though he can be completely divorced from the Liberal heritage of unpopularity, but somehow he's overcome it. I think that the public seems to have decided early on, at about the point that Carney says, well, he's not going to bend the knee to President Trump. And if President Trump doesn't show proper respect, in other words, forget the 51st state business and calling him governor.
Absolutely.
If he doesn't show respect, then he, Carney, isn't going to take his calls. And Canadians like that. And that was about when they decided, yeah, this is the man who's going to lead our strategy to fight back against Trump. They want to see Trump punched in the nose. And they seem to be on the point of delivering that punch. In fact, I really think that President Trump ought to send, or to receive, I should say, a thank you note from the Liberal Party of Canada for reviving their electoral prospects.
Well, sir, always a pleasure to have you on our show and hear your views. Thank you so much for your time. Let's also get in a word from Brampton at the moment. Vikram Chaudhary is with us, waiting patiently. Vikram, is the fear then of economic instability under Trump pushing the Indo-Canadian community, which has a huge footprint in Brampton, towards the Liberals and Mark Carney?
Yeah, but before that, I can tell you the polling has ended here in Brampton and in Ontario as well. So now the counting of votes has started. So Ontario gives the largest, sends the largest number of MPs to the House of Commons. But here the issues were not different. Of course, they were different till about December of 2024. Brampton had its own unique set of issues. Khalistan, of course, was one of those issues. Then ties with India was a major issue. Economic condition and also housing and affordability had become a major issue in Brampton. Brampton, one of the most expensive areas in GTA where you can buy and afford a house. But after Trump was sworn in, the entire country had a different issue. There, from all of a sudden, from issues, local issues, the issue was more of survival for the entire country. People could make out, voters could make out is that Trump would get Canada to a situation where Canada would kneel and say that we want to join US as the 51st state. So people thought that perhaps now the idea is of a strong leadership. Who can give us a strong leadership and perhaps take us and take Donald Trump head on, and then they saw Mark Carney. He made it clear that he's not Trudeau, he's not Justin Trudeau, though he was his advisor, but he's the guy that Canada can rely on. So I think that was very important. And he wasn't a politician, so he made it very loud and clear. Though this campaigning was always about how loud your campaigning is, but he wasn't very loud, but he made his point very clear. And even when he was sworn in as the prime minister, the interim prime minister, his message to US and Donald Trump was very clear, and he and Donald Trump refrained addressing him as the governor of Canada. So that was a first win for Canadians, and I think that's where the 25% difference between conservative and liberals started to shrink, and it got to a point where liberals are leading today. And now I can tell you for the next 1 hour, it's going to be very important how Toronto, how Ontario, how GTA shows up. And looks like first indications are that perhaps it's going to be a bit of liberals' edge here in GTA. GTA is very important. Of course, this is one of the most populated areas in Canada and gives and sends the largest number of MPs to the House of Commons. So which way GTA is going to go is very important. Most of these leaders, they were focusing on GTA. And I can tell you, Jagmeet Singh's political career started from GTA. And this election, perhaps, this is the third election where he's leading NDP. I think this would be a decisive election for him and NDP. So Jagmeet Singh's party could lose one of the opposition parties' status if they don't get to 12 seats. So this is going to be very important. And also, the local issues have taken a side seat. Now, the major issue is taking Donald Trump head on.
Right, Vikram, as always, thanks so much for that crucial update. I must also inform our viewers that Jagmeet Singh's NDP gains a lead in 2 seats as we speak at the moment. With that, let's also go across to Richmond Hill and get you an update from Toronto with Yash. Yash, is there visible frustration among young first-time Canadian voters, Indian Canadian voters, about the government's handling of the inflation crisis, the housing crisis?
Oh, well, absolutely. That is the only point that everyone's talking about. The high number of immigrants that are coming into this country. I say that with the confidence that I'm also a new immigrant to this country. And unchecked immigration is one of the big issues, yes, for sure. And at the same time, the rising costs that comes with it, because to have so many people in a country of finite size, which is ever growing, is a big issue as well. But at the same time, the housing crisis, which finally the bubble has burst in Ontario, at least in GTA, because at one point of time, small matchbox size homes were going for million plus in downtown Toronto, and now suddenly there is a sharp decline of over 50% of sales, and realtors across in GTA are finding it really hard to sell those condos which were built initially. There are buildings which have more than 30% vacancy now when it comes to renting or purchasing. So those are some of the issues. And my friends who are first-time voters, when it comes to this election, they have the same problem. But, it reminds me of elections from India, to be honest. When it comes to having state elections, we vote for issues. We vote for candidates who promise certain things, but when it comes to voting for national issues, we vote for a leader. And that's exactly what I think everyone who has spoken before me has addressed, that at a time of crisis when Trump was trying to bully Canada into submission, it was a welcome move for the Liberals. And the exact period between January to now, late April, has been such an interesting case study, because if you notice that how the Conservatives were having such a big not even an edge, they were hoping for a landslide victory. Yes. If the elections were calling, they were threatening that they should be calling. Liberals should be calling elections, and suddenly now, the balance has swung in favor of the Liberals.
Yash, thanks so much. We'll, of course, revert to you for regular updates. I'm told we need to slip into a very quick commercial break for now, but we're back in a moment. You don't want to miss the latest updates we're tracking on NDTV. Well, you are watching NDTV. We are tracking the latest as far as Battleground Canada is concerned. I'm Parmeshwar Bava. All the extensive updates are right here on the NDTV network. Let's begin with the top headlines we're tracking currently. As far as the initial indications are concerned, Mark Carney's Liberal Party maintains the lead in Canada. While polls have already closed in the Atlantic region, they are set to close across Canada in a short while. Jagmeet Singh's NDP gains a lead in one seat. The magic number that his party is chasing is 12 to remain in power. Well, first results are being projected in Canada, where a snap election is being held to determine who will become the country's next Prime Minister. Polls have closed in the Atlantic region, and in just a short while from now, they will close across Canada. And like the United Kingdom, Canada has a first-past-the-post electoral system. What exactly does this mean? Let me break it down for you. The candidate who gets the most votes in each electoral district or riding wins that seat and becomes an MP. The share of votes doesn't have to be a majority, it just has to be one more vote than the second place candidate. So under the system, a party can actually secure the most seats in the House of Commons without receiving the most votes across the whole country, which is exactly what happened in the last election. You see, back in 2021, the Liberals finished as the largest party by winning 47% of the seats, ahead of the Conservatives on 35%. In fact, what exactly are the key issues that Canada is basing this election on? You must note that the polls this time are seen as the most important election in a generation. It is one of the world's most prosperous nations and America's closest ally and trading partner. And Canada has found itself in recent months unexpectedly in the crosshairs of US President Donald Trump, targeted with tariffs and annexation threats as well. But the country has also seen many of its national accomplishments in regard to the economy and social issues slip, including higher costs of living, higher unemployment, tighter immigration laws, as we've been covering extensively on NDTV, rising housing costs, as well as a surge in homelessness and substance abuse. Many of these problems, not just in Canada, but in other advanced economies, were actually exacerbated by the pandemic, but Canadians are blaming a decade of Liberal Party rule under Justin Trudeau for the country's woes. What exactly is it that got 7 million people to head for advanced polling? Take a look at the key issues that Canada is basing this election on.
As Canadians head to polls, the major parties have made their final push to address some key issues. So what are they, and how are they shaping one of the most consequential elections in the country's history? One of the most important issues is the cost of living crisis, something Canada has been grappling with for years. Both the main parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, have promised tax cuts for people in the lowest tax bracket. While Liberals are offering 1 percentage point cut, their opponents have promised to lower the rate from 15 to 12.75%. The campaigns have hinged on how the next leader would handle the trade crisis with its closest economic ally, the United States. The Conservatives have vowed tax relief for workers affected by the Trump tariffs. On the other hand, the Liberals have said they would help workers and businesses with the money raised by counter tariffs. Another issue affecting millions is skyrocketing home prices. While the Liberals want to create a federal entity that would act as a developer for affordable housing, the Conservatives are aiming to build 2.3 million homes in Canada in the next 5 years. With primarily these issues in mind, Canadians will decide who leads their country through some troubled times. Vishal Vivek's report for NDTV World.
Look, I'm a very different person from Justin Trudeau.
And let's quickly get in a view, the vantage point from Washington at the moment with Nick Harper, who joins us live. Nick, take us through what's happening from Washington's lens. Is there a tilt towards Mark Carney or Pierre Poilievre? What's the latest?
Yeah, a fascinating election for the United States to watch, no less because Donald Trump has made Canada so central to what he's been trying to achieve over the last 3 months, those 100 days that he's been in office, attacking Canada on multiple fronts, accusing them of letting in too many illegal migrants across the border that the US and Canada shares, accusing them of sending fentanyl across the border into the United States that then kills Americans, and of course attacking them with trade tariffs that he has placed on the US's northern neighbour. And on top of that, joking repeatedly about Canada becoming the United States' 51st state. Interesting that the two men really who are in contention of becoming the next Prime Minister, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre, both of them have differing views of Donald Trump. Both of them have attacked him repeatedly, saying that he is trying to divide Canadians. But interesting that Mark Carney seems to have been the man who's been able to capture the message better than Pierre Poilievre. He's been able to unite Canadians in the face of Donald Trump. He's the man, I guess, who's been able to capture that advantage. Because bear in mind, Poilievre's Conservatives were far and away above in the polls about 3 months ago, before Donald Trump put those tariffs in place. And then Mark Carney, capturing that message of defiance against Donald Trump, surged in the polls. But of course, Poilievre, as a Conservative, is much closer in nature to Donald Trump, a Republican. Some have compared him, saying that he is a mini Trump, both of them against woke ideologies that they say have infected both the United States and Canada. And yet it might not be the person who wins tonight's election. It might be Mark Carney, who's clearly going to be a harder concept for Donald Trump to try and deal with over the coming months. He's already proven himself in the short time that he's been Prime Minister since Justin Trudeau stood down as someone who is fierily going to stand up for Canada's rights, for Canada's sovereignty, and for Canada's trade unity.
Nick, then, is the US viewing Mark Carney's rise as a direct pushback against Trumpism, against Trump's transactional nature and his protectionist policies?
Well, I think if Mark Carney wins tonight, there could be a question mark as to whether that could have happened if it was not for Donald Trump. We have a potential scenario here that Donald Trump is putting his stamp on a foreign government's election. Mark Carney potentially might not have stood a chance of winning, might not have stood a chance of keeping the Liberals in power for a fourth consecutive term if it was not for the fact that Donald Trump had launched that attack on Canada, trying to get it to become the US's 51st state. and launching a whole raft of tariffs upon it. Pierre Poilievre with the Conservatives were in such a strong position because the country was disgruntled. They were unhappy with Justin Trudeau. They were unhappy of 10 years of him in power with the Liberals fronting the country. And the Conservatives were saying it was time for change. However, when Donald Trump launched his tariff attacks, Pierre Poilievre didn't pivot to the moment in a way that Mark Carney did. Poilievre was continuing to push the idea that it was time to push the Liberals out, whereas Mark Carney was trying to unite Canadians around the threat of Donald Trump. And I think by capturing that better than the Conservatives were able to do, I think put Carney in a much stronger position. So Donald Trump, it could be argued, has potentially had a direct result on this election, especially if Carney is the victor tonight.
On that note then, Nick, is Washington also seeing Canada's election as a test case for whether democracies can actually resist the strongman politics trend?
Well, potentially, yes. And I think Donald Trump has made it very clear that he is involved in Canada, that he wants to be more closely involved in Canada. We'll find out later on tonight whether or not Canadians feel that Donald Trump is the central issue, because as we heard just a moment ago, there are a whole raft of domestic issues that Canadians care very strongly about, everything from taxation to housing, even to climate change. It just so happens that Donald Trump has, in some respects, infected the election, becoming a dominant issue. We'll have to wait and see whether Canadians have decided that they are going to try and stand up to that strong man in politics, to stand up to the person that they feel is threatening their sovereignty. And I think Mark Carney, of course, has really tried to make that a rallying cry. He even said in campaigning over the weekend that Donald Trump was trying to break Canada so that America can own us. Canadians have said time and again they do not see that as a funny joke, this idea of Canadian sovereignty being expelled, of it becoming part of the United States. That joke, they say, wore thin a very long time ago. And they, of course, have seen that surge in nationalistic spirit, something that Mark Carney has managed to capitalise on, and I guess in part, therefore, helped by Donald Trump and the rhetoric that he has been putting out against Canada.
Nick, as always, thank you so much for taking us through the latest developments and also contextualising all the key details for us. Let's get in a word from Vancouver and Brampton at the moment with my colleagues Maha Siddiqui and Vikram Chaudhary. Maha, to you first. Liberals are taking an early lead, as we can see, with 50.6%, as Conservatives are trailing at about 38.8%. If you can just pull that map up for you, which has the latest updates. Maha, to what extent is this election then a rejection of Trump-style populism rather than an endorsement of the Liberals?
Well, if you go by the way Donald Trump has been talking about these elections and also on Truth Social putting out messages again this morning when Canada started voting, it is clear that he is the big issue in the Canadian election. And the voters are choosing a leader today, needless to say, at the current moment, somebody who can take on Donald Trump. In that context, if you see some of the commentary here, some of the, in fact, political comedy that goes around in the country as well, if I can refer to it, they have all been talking about Pierre Poilievre as being Trump light, and therefore clearly looking at Pierre Poilievre as somebody who has in the past aligned with Donald Trump, and therefore even though at the last minute he tried to take a very strong stand against Donald Trump, even today when that message was put out on Truth Social, Pierre Poilievre responded to it, saying that never will Canada be the 51st state of the United States. However, they took very long in pivoting their campaign towards what was the big issue for the Canadians over the last 3 months. And that was the annexation threat from the US and the economic coercion coming their way in the form of tariffs. And that's exactly where Mark Carney's campaign was able to capture the voters. They were able to project him as a person, a serious contender to take on Donald Trump because of his past record of being the governor of Bank of England, Bank of Canada, being a banker, former banker, an economist. And even though he's a political outsider, suddenly the voters started gravitating towards him as an entity who would be one person who can negotiate at equal terms with US President Donald Trump. And that really is the big issue, the dominant issue. And we are seeing the voting today that has taken place and the advance voting as well. Remember, 7.3 million people came out, 25% higher than 2021. All this indicative of the fact that the people in Canada want to give a majority to a party, which is likely to be the Liberals, as the trends are suggesting at the moment. And this is largely to give the Prime Minister enough support and be able to give him that heft to be able to take on US President Donald Trump.
Right, Maha, just before I let you go, among South Asians in British Columbia, where you are, is there concern that Trump's hostile posture, if Mark Carney takes the hot seat, will create uncertainty for Canadian trade with India and Asia?
See, one issue that was dominant for the people of Indian origin was also the issue of immigration. And on that count, they perceived Pierre Poilievre's politics, or the politics of the Conservatives, in alignment with somewhat of what the US talks about. The fears with regards to an immigration policy that may be that may not be conducive to this community is something that that the Liberals they find more comforting in that direction. And therefore, for them, the issue of which way they want to vote is determined by some of their own concerns as well. As far as the issue of trade overall is concerned, and the issue of trade with regards to British Columbia itself is concerned, British Columbia has lumber trade specifically with the US, and that has been mired in a dispute between the two sides for many years now. And therefore, trade relations, if you only specifically look at the province of British Columbia, that is also something that was a hard-pressing issue for BC. And people in BC understand the repercussions that they could have faced because of Donald Trump and his tariffs that he was imposing. Of course, some of the bigger tariffs in the auto sector are hitting more on the East Coast. But overall, the understanding that the Canadians have with regards to tariffs, how it could hit them, how it could raise, in fact, the cost of living for people here is all something that is determining the voter turnout today, as well as the results that we'll be seeing today.
Thanks so much, Maha, for joining us with the lowdown from Vancouver. Let's get in a word from Brampton at the moment with Vikram. Vikram, do issues like rising cost of living and affordability outweigh global concerns like US-Canada relations for voters in Brampton?
Absolutely. I think, as we discussed earlier, it was a question of survival for Canadians, and the more of unity. That was nationalism and unity which took the center stage. Of course, inflation, affordability, and economy in shatters. That was one of the issues, but that was 3 months ago. If today's vote share of Liberal Party is, if you take into account, 2 months is a long time in politics, and that's the testimony here. And when Mark Carney, was sworn in, he made it very clear. I think the first thing he had to clear is that he doesn't carry the baggage from legacy of Justin Trudeau. He said that he's nothing to do with Justin Trudeau, and there's no similarity between him and Justin Trudeau. Axe the tax was one of the slogans that Mark Carney was champion of. What happened is that the day Mark Carney took over, he abolished the taxes. So there was no tax on carbon. So that was a major relief for consumers out here. But besides the point, I think what Canadian people, they realize that other things can be taken care of later on, but what needs to be dealt right now is Donald Trump. So Donald Trump's rhetoric was the major concern and one of the top issues. And as we've seen in the last couple of months, Mark Carney, all of a sudden with his statesmanship, he wasn't a champion of slogans, but his polished style and his bureaucratic style, I think that went home with most of the voters. And what we're seeing perhaps is 2021 Liberal Party was at its peak, the popularity was at its peak, but still they failed to get their own majority. So their reasons, their political analysts who believe that there could be
I must
reasons.
inform, I sincerely apologize, I'm cutting you through. We have breaking news coming in at the moment. CBC is calling it for the Liberals. As per their preliminary data analysis, CBC is saying that Liberals will indeed be leading Canada into this next phase. That's the breaking news we're tracking at the moment as far as Battleground Canada is concerned. CBC clearly saying that the Liberal Party is likely to win. We'll keep tracking all the latest updates for you. Let's just get in a quick word from Michael before we go into a short commercial break. Michael, CBC now saying the Liberal Party is likely to win and Mark Carney is likely to be in the hot seat?
Yes, that's true, and there's probably going to be a minority government. That's what it looks like. I will say that I think this is a swan song for Jagmeet Singh. He's having a challenge in his own riding and performed poorly in Quebec and has lost something like 6 seats. So I think the NDP party will have to consider a new leader. I think that Mark Carney will probably take a minority government. But that means that we're going to be in a perilous situation because formerly the NDP was the one that held a little bit of the judgment, if you wish, because they were aligned with the Liberals. Now with Pierre Poilievre as the official opposition, we may have a little more turmoil. And then the Parti Québécois, the Bloc Québécois, will have a lot more power. So it's going to be an interesting ride for the next little while. But they still need some seats to get a majority, and a lot of Canada's West is still to come in, which is very conservative. So I think it may be still a little tighter than those would think. But there are some public broadcasting entities that have called the election for the Liberals because there's only so many seats left.
Right. Michael, meanwhile, how unprecedented would you say this political comeback is for the Liberals compared to Justin Trudeau's reign and now under Mark Carney and the result that we're seeing as far as preliminary information is concerned?
Yes, I would agree with you. I think unprecedented. First of all, when you consider that the Conservatives had a 20-point lead approximately 6 months ago, and then for the last 6 weeks, I mean, the Liberals have had over a 10-point lead. Considering the sentiment of Canadians for the carbon tax and the distaste that they had for the way Trudeau was conducting this country, it's quite a remarkable save, as one would say, that Mark Carney has been able to do. So I think it's going to be quite interesting. There may be a challenge, I will say, with the leadership of the Conservatives because we'll have to see if Pierre Poilievre can hold on to it.
Well, we'll unpack